So now it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce to you. Oh, he's here. He's here already. There he is, Mark. Mark Turner.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody.
A senior leader, director of studies, I think, in schools for a long time, responsible for professional development of staff, actually, so particularly relevant, supporting the whole staff. And I know feels as passionate as I do about supporting the whole staff. And now is director of Motivational Maps Education Limited, a very, very important service for schools, where we'll talk briefly about the motivational maps, actually. But Mark is also the author of the Guide to Motivation and the Motivation Plan, which features at the beginning of the Pathway program, and it's a really empowering program. So I'll stop sharing and I'll say thank you ever so much for joining us, Mark. It's great to see you.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Great to see you, and you can hear me okay, and we can see you okay. So the technology is working so far. Well, why don't, for those on the call that aren't familiar with your work so far, why don't you tell us a little bit about your professional journey to date? I'd be fascinated to hear it.
My journey, or my pathway, indeed.
Your pathway, indeed. Nice. I suppose began when I was really, really young, and I think we often take this for granted. When I was in the equivalent of primary school, I was classified as being what was then referred to as ESN. And it's got a lovely ring to it. Someone who is educationally subnormal. And to have that label stuck on you at such an age is quite a thing to bear. And so at that age, I actually decided I'm going to teach. And it wasn't, I'm going to carry this label around with me. It was, I'm going to teach. And the reason that I wanted to teach was because I wanted to ensure that nobody else would have to suffer what I suffered. And I found it easier to get thrown out of the maths lesson rather than endure the pain of being in the maths lesson. And so sure enough, I did my degree, and I've worked in primary schools, secondary schools, independent schools, state schools, maintained schools within the UK and abroad. And as you so rightly said, my last role, Andrew, part of my responsibility was for the continuous professional development of the staff. Right. And it's when I was doing that I began to get really interested in motivation. Because part of this was about staff having the opportunity to go off and do training, attend courses in those wonderful days, if you remember them, where we used to all meet together in a conference centre and things like that. Anyway, off they'd go on these courses, and we'd say to them on their return, how was the course? How was the conference? Great. It was fantastic. You should have seen the hotel. Absolutely wonderful. But actually nothing changed about their practice. And it was that made me raise the question, well, if it's not about skills or knowledge or direction, what is it about? And that has to be that it was about education, about a third factor, motivation. And that is where I became really interested in what was happening. So what for you is it then? So motivation, what is it in your opinion?
It's a very big question, really.
Yep.
I think in the first instance, we should not confuse motivation with personality. And if we consider personality, that is what someone is like, what we know about them. And equally, motivation is not about someone's strengths or weaknesses, which is, if you like, the how of someone, how they work. So we can have the personality is what we know about someone, the strength and weaknesses is what we see about them. And both those are fairly fixed things. Motivation, on the other hand, is the why of someone. It's not the
the what or the how, it's the why. In other words, it's what is unknown and unseen.
Right.
So therefore, it almost becomes part of our relationship between our consciousness and our subconsciousness. And it is about our energy, about our drive. And we need to remember that motivation is not a coat that we put on to go out to work in the morning and then take off when we get home in the evening, Andrew. It's common to every aspect of our life, whether we're at work, at home, with family, in the community, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so we understand our motivation as professionals. That is obviously going to have a beneficial impact on our levels of self-confidence, our levels of self-awareness, our levels of self-esteem, and most importantly, our self-efficacy. And a very large part of that motivation relates to Maslow's hierarchy. And so we need to think about our needs as an individual first. And when I talk about our needs, we're looking at things like stability, security, warmth, love, food, etc. And if someone's functioning on those levels, then we can't talk to them about changing the world.
That's right.
Because they've got something far more important on their mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that our motivation is a static thing, or is it dynamic? Does it change, or is it always the same?
Oh,
what motivates us?
Absolutely, it changes.
Right.
And whilst in most adults, as long as they've got that level of security and stability and all that they need, etc., then they can begin to function and think on the higher levels in terms of what they want to become, what they want to achieve, what they want to do. And that remains fairly constant.
Right.
However, motivation can and does change according to our circumstances at any given time. And so one of the greatest examples that I can give you of that, Andrew, is an occasion when someone said 4 words to me.
Right.
And because of those 4 words, what motivated me totally changed.
Right.
In an instant.
Right.
And the 4 words were, yep, it is cancer. And suddenly what was important to me before that became comparatively unimportant. What for me was comparatively unimportant before that became completely important. But my behavior didn't change. My personality didn't change. My strengths and weaknesses didn't change. And luckily now, you know, I'm in the clear. And so I've reverted to where I was before. And so
example.
Our circumstances do dictate our motivation. And because the circumstances dictate the motivation then dictates the behavior.
And how do we become more aware of it? Are there some simple techniques and strategies you can share so that we can measure our motivation, if indeed it is measurable?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's completely measurable. If we think about a school or indeed any organization, it needs to be borne in mind that there are 3 elements to success of that organization. We've got to have a strategic direction supported by our culture and our values, etc. We've got to have the skills and knowledge to be able to be successful at what we do. And then the third thing is we've got to be motivated to do it. And so if you want a performance rating for someone, simply ask the question, how skillful on a scale of 1 to 10 do you think this person is? And then again, on a scale of 1 to 10, how motivated do you think they are?
Mm.
And if we've got 7 for the skills, 7 for the motivation, multiply the two, and we've got someone who is performing at 49% of capacity. If you think of a member of staff that you've worked with who was underperforming, and just simply ask yourself the question, is it a skills and knowledge thing, or is it a motivational thing? I would say probably 80% of the time, it comes down to motivation. And so we have the ability to do that as a sort of finger up in the air type of test.
Yeah.
But then there is the motivational map itself, Andrew, which is a 10-minute online assessment. And what that does is it identifies what motivates an individual. In the second place, it identifies how strong those motivational needs are. And then thirdly, it identifies the degree to which those needs are being met by our current circumstances. And if your needs are not being met, your motivational levels are low. Therefore, your fulfillment levels are low. And there's a danger under those circumstances that you're being asked to spend a lot of time doing something that doesn't particularly motivate you.
Right.
And under those circumstances, you can still do a fantastic job. You can be really good at it. Everybody used to think their perception was that I was brilliant at writing policies. If they wanted a policy, it was go to Mark. Mark will write the policy for you. Mark was exceptional at writing policies, but he hated writing policies.
Oh, dear.
And so if we're spending a lot of time working in an aspect of the organization that doesn't motivate us, what we've got to bear in mind, Andrew, is that it's like the headlights on the car being on full beam. And we're giving all this energy out and we're doing a fantastic job at lighting the way. But actually, the headlights are on full beam, the engine isn't running, the battery is becoming drained. And just as we were saying and listening to earlier, we've got to keep refilling that battery.
Yeah, we have.
Because if we don't tend to it, sooner or later, the headlights will go out because there's no power left in the battery. It will almost implode. And of course, we've nothing then to restart the engine.
So true.
And that's almost the point where someone's saying, well, actually, I want out of teaching. I can't keep doing this.
So in the
and so it's about our well-being as much as anything. Again, going back to our previous speakers, it is about our health. We need a balance of spirit and body and mind to be able to be fulfilled people. How often are motivated people absent? They're not. Very rarely. Very, very rarely.
That's so true. And in the pathway program, in the guide to motivation that we've done, we've actually encouraged, have we not, pathway users to actually revisit their job description, which I think, frankly, in my experience, is a fairly rare thing to do, actually. And do you want to just talk briefly about what you would suggest they do with that? And of course, Maslow is included in that. It's very interesting what you came up with.
Of course it is. It's not only looking at the job description, i.e. what is my role?
Yeah.
But if we look at that role and we then say, well, even on a simple level, how much of this am I doing? Am I doing a lot, a little, none? How much of it do I want to do? Do I want to do a lot, a little, none? And so actually, even there, we can begin to get a little bit of a measure on what motivates us and how much of our time we're spending doing that. And I would say it's then transferring that across as well. and very, very rarely do I ever hear anybody say that they do this, is going back to the job specification in terms of the attributes that we're going to bring and to apply to that role. And to again go through the attributes and say, well, am I displaying these attributes? How often am I displaying them, etc.? And then taking it back to the job description and saying, well, where do I need to be doing this? Or in which one of these am I doing this? And if I'm avoiding any or not doing any, why is that?
Why is that?
Therefore, it becomes this idea of what do I need to change? What can I do differently? How can I grow in terms of this process? And that period of growth and development might involve all aspects of our motivation, those that deal with our personal and professional growth, our sense of purpose and being, and also looking at how we're going to do that. And so it's about our expertise, our skills, our knowledge, our direction, etc. And then our communication with others as well, and how we're going to involve them, include them, etc. So we've got the being, having, and doing, all those types of things that are building in there.
Fascinating, so interesting. And what about how we understand the motivational needs of others, and particularly as leaders on the call? Why is that important to do that?
I think it's wonderful. A number of times, Andrew, that at the beginning of the academic year, I've been asked to go along and speak to the staff as part of their development.
Right.
And the head gets up at the beginning of the staff meeting and, hello everybody, lovely to see you again, hope you've had a good holidays, etc. It's going to be a little bit different next time round, I'm quite sure. And then after that little bit of an introduction, there's almost inevitably the statement where the head says, during the course of the holidays, I've been thinking. And all the staff need to do is to hear that I've been thinking. And you can see a total change in the body attitude of the members of staff as they begin to dig the trenches and put their tin helmets on.
Right.
Because for them, thinking equates to change.
Right.
And almost immediately, we've lost them because we've been using the wrong language. So rather than approaching in, during the holidays, I've been thinking, and what the head was thinking about was changing the assessment system or something of that ilk, or the timing of the school day, for example, almost immediately you've lost a large portion of your staff. And we need to think about the language and the needs of the members of staff that we're working with. And so, for example, there will be those staff who need to belong, they need a sense of teamwork, they want to work together, they need security, stability, etc. And so if the head were to preface their comments quite simply by saying something like, it's really important in the coming year that you have more time with your family. It's really important during the coming year that you get greater enjoyment out of your work. To me, I think it's going to be really important that we spend less time on pointless, worthless activities, thus giving us more time.
That's right.
And suddenly people are going, oh, right, okay, I like the sound of that. How are you going to do that? Well, actually, I think one of the ways we could do that is by changing the assessment system. And they will still listen because they can see the benefits on a very, very personal level for them. We're talking to their motivation.
Interesting.
And therefore they're included and involved.
Of course they are. Yeah, yeah. And that's because you're more mindful of what motivates them rather than just what motivates you, which might be newness and change and new ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not everybody
so we've got to pick up the signals on what it is that is important to them. And of course, one of the ways of doing that is through the motivational map.
Well, I was very interested. Yeah, carry on. Sorry.
Sorry, Andrew. I mean, if you think about it for a second, if you've got someone who needs to belong, needs to be secured, wants to be liked, etc., and they're coming into school in the morning, and as they're walking down the corridor, they meet the head going in the other direction. And this person says to the head, you know, Mary or Michael or whatever their name is, says to the head, "Good morning." And because the head is going to a safeguarding meeting, have I got these papers? Have I got this? Just doesn't even hear the good morning, walks straight on down past the corridor. Now that person that they passed is immediately going to be thinking, what have I done to upset them? What did I say yesterday? What didn't I do yesterday that I should have done? What have I got wrong? And so they will then be worried, and because it will then be so important to them to get to talk to the head to find out A, what they think they've done wrong, and B, what they need to do to put it right, because they hate conflict, they hate upsetting people. And all through the day, yes, they will be teaching, they will do this, but at the back of their mind, they've got this worm. And so just a simple thing like not saying good morning to someone at the right time, not smiling at them, not asking them how the dog is, can be terribly damaging in terms of that person's ability to perform at their highest level throughout the day.
Absolutely. I was on a course recently, actually, Mark, about it's a company-wide thing on management and leadership and so forth, and we were looking at micromanagement and even microaggression, but we all looked at micro affirmation as well, which was really interesting way of looking at it. And I'd not really heard that phrase before, micro affirmation, which in a way is what you're saying, that you can also spin it the other way and actually constantly provide those. They may seem small little moments of affirmation and so forth and encouragement, but if you don't provide those, they do chip away, don't they? I think there's a lack.
Oh, they do.
It's on your mind. We're human after all.
As a leader, the question is, if we're not doing it, who is?
Yeah. And so if you look at the guide to motivation, which I was so pleased to work with you on, and honestly, it was such a privilege, and it's such an empowering program. It really is. And it really encourages self-reflection, and it's very empowering. But why were you particularly keen to get involved in it? Because I was so pleased that you jumped at the chance.
I was delighted to be part of it, Andrew.
Yeah, well, we were pleased.
I think putting this as briefly and as succinctly as I can, schools and members of staff who work in schools, whether from the caretaking staff through to the leadership team, the governance of the school, etc., but most importantly, the teachers.
Yeah.
They have in their hands the future. That is no small responsibility. And actually, I take my hat off to them. But by staying in the past, we will not attain the future. And I think, by doing what we've always done, we will get what we've always had. And so we're in a place now where my passion that everybody should have the right to succeed has become very, very strong. And it's been difficult during the last year. And I think there's a growing recognition that we've got to do things differently. We've got to become more holistic. We've got to think about ourselves. We have got to start providing the conversations that allow people to realize what an important contribution they have to make and how we can move them forward. One of the things that I'm hearing now, whether through LEAs, schools, trusts, etc., is that they are beginning to recognize that with certain cohorts of students, they have got to start doing things differently.
Right.
And actually, they're willing to say that everything we have done in the past will not work. Therefore, we've got to think outside the box. What I love about the Pathway program is that it is totally cutting edge. And for me, the uniqueness of it is that it's a gift that grows as we do.
Right.
So whether we're an NQT, an RQT, middle leader, senior leader, whatever we might be, it's wholly appropriate according to our needs and experiences at the time.
Right.
And so, you know, whilst the program is there, because we are in a different place, the program takes on a new lease of life.
Absolutely.
I just love that.
Yeah, it's beautifully summarized. And I think that's why I was so keen to work with you on it. Well, we've had a couple of very quick questions, if we can just sort of have some very quick answers from you. And it's
delighted, Andrew.
It's so important. It's very difficult to provide quick answers, isn't it? But well, first of all, an interesting comment from Zara. If you're not motivated to do something, surely you would not do a good job of it. It's an interesting comment, isn't it? I suppose.
I think it's quite an astute job.
It is, isn't it?
Comment. I think because we're not motivated by something doesn't mean that we won't do a good job. There are other aspects of motivation that might dominate that. For example, our need to be the best that we can be at whatever we choose to do.
Yes.
However, if we continue to do that over a long period of time, it might lead to that implosion that I've spoken about.
Very true.
I think maybe more importantly is, rather than not doing a good job, it's one of the things I find most difficult to cope with in education. It's the one thing that made me bite my tongue, Andrew, is when people said to me, well, I'm sorry, but I didn't have time. And actually that I'm sorry I didn't have time is someone telling me that they weren't interested in doing it, because if they were interested in doing it, they would have found the time and they would have done it. And so I think rather than doing a bad job, they're almost more likely not to do it at all.
Right.
And that's because it's either the wrong thing to ask them to do, and therefore it's a leadership problem, not the problem of the person that we've asked to do it.
That's fascinating. And gosh, we could spend a day on that one, actually. We've had an interesting question from Sarah. What is the relationship between motivation and learning ability?
In terms of the ability, I would say probably very little. Because if we're motivated by something, we will do it. But whether we are motivated to be the best or to master it is a different matter.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's right.
Because we might have a very motivated, for example, child who has set a bit of story writing or composition or something like that. Now, that's not going to make them the best at it, because if their motivation is for freedom and independence, it's probably more important to them that they're going to be the first to finish. And so they'll write two sentences, put their hand up and say, I've finished. No, the stimulation has already passed for them.
That's right.
So there are a huge number of things that come into motivation. It's our creativity. It's how we work collaboratively or not. It's our independence. It's our communication with others. It's our level of or need for mastery. And we've got to give those people time to think, because they can't just start it. They need to gather themselves and get as much information as they can. There are so many factors, Andrew.
Very true. And just finally then, before we let you go, we've had a question from Amal. How to motivate my students by different ways. How some tips on how to motivate my students in different ways. My goodness. You do present whole days on this. I know you do.
Yeah. When I first came across the motivational maps created by James Sale, I just needed to know what my students would be.
Yeah.
And so along with James, we produced a youth version of the motivational maps.
Yeah.
And all I can say, is once that was completed, it saved me months of time in trying to get to know and understand them.
Yeah.
And therefore it changed my planning and teaching and the experiences that I provided for the opportunity for the children, the opportunities that I gave them, how I organized the classroom. It impacted on every single aspect of the teaching and learning.
And how do we find out more about, I know it's not Pathway, how do we find out more about the work that you're doing in the motivational maps then, Mark?
Well, I mean, if you'd like to, please do go to the website.
Well,
I would be absolutely delighted to talk with people. So I think you've got my number there up on the screen.
I'll share that at the end.
You've got my email address. Contact me.
Certainly will do. I'll share that at the end, and I very much hope people get in touch, because I know myself how powerful those motivational maps are, because I had one for myself and then for my children as well. Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. It's been a really insightful conversation, and we haven't, I mean, we could have gone on for hours, couldn't we? You deliver whole day insets on motivation.
There's so much there, Andrew, that we haven't scratched the surface.
But thank you for doing so anyway. It's been brilliant to see you. And
bless you, my friend.
Let's do it again soon. Thanks, Mark. Super.